Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Atlanta, Georgia, it's time for Atlanta Business Radio. Brought to you by OnPay. Built in Atlanta, OnPay is the top-rated payroll and HR software anywhere. Get 1 month free at onpay.com. Now, here's your host.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of Atlanta Business Radio, and this is going to be a good one. But before we get started, it's important to recognize our sponsor, OnPay. Without them, we could not be sharing these important stories. Today on Atlanta Business Radio, we have Dave Excell with Featurespace. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Lee. That's great to be on today.
Well, I'm excited to learn what you're up to. Please share a little bit about Featurespace, who you serving, and how you doing it.
So Featurespace, we're a financial crime solution company. So we help different organizations across the financial industry identify fraud and financial risk and try to keep the criminals out from stealing that money and keeping everything safe and secure.
So what's the backstory? What was the catalyst for the idea?
So I was studying at the University of Cambridge over in the United Kingdom. And while I was studying, I was really interested in how we could understand human behavior through analytics and then into machine learning. And then where we started to look at sort of applications of my research, it was how we could start to differentiate between what a good consumer was doing and what a fraudulent or bad consumer was doing. And then a lot of the innovation then came from, well, a lot of consumers are good consumers. They're legitimately using different financial services or purchasing online. So how could we build solutions that would understand what a good customer looks like, and then being able to use that to identify anomalous and bad behavior and provide that into the financial ecosystem to be able to very accurately identify fraud and criminal activity that's taking place.
And for the listener who doesn't maybe isn't as familiar, fraud and bad actors in this space is that's chaotic. It's a disease. It's happening every single day, and the folks that are doing this as kind of a full-time job. This isn't like kind of that 14-year-old kid in the basement, being a prankster. These are organized players that are doing this professionally, right?
No, exactly. And they're almost organizations in their own right. And they are very technically minded, often using very sophisticated information and technology to be able to perpetrate their crime and really attacking different areas in terms of where they can identify weakness and being able to use that all the way through different components of the financial system.
And they're organized in the sense that when somebody stumbles upon a technique that works, they're sharing best practices, and it's going network wide pretty rapidly, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's information where they share weaknesses and vulnerabilities amongst themselves, but also organized in themselves as they operate much like businesses, where there's employees that work on certain aspects, either to collect data or to hone their skill. And then different people who may be contacting customers as scams, perpetrating to be from a financial institution. And then they're refining their techniques as a group and looking at sort of how they operate more efficiently.
So now when you came up with your solution, you were kind of attacking this in a different way of dealing with behavioral aspects of a good user rather than kind of a fraudulent user?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of how fraud solutions have worked historically is they look at fraud which has taken place in the past, and they try to define what that fraud looks like, and then going forward into the future as they continue to re-identify that same bad activity that took place. Like a very simple example could be looking at two transactions that happen within 30 seconds of each other, and the value of those transactions together is over $1,000, and that may be an indication that fraud's taken place. But then I guess the fraudsters start to see that when they repeat that behavior, those transactions may be blocked. But then also, unfortunately, for us as good consumers, sometimes we may make purchases like that and then they get declined, and then there's a poor customer experience. So what we did is we really focused on, well, how does a legitimate person spend money? How do they interact with their bank? And we use that as a sort of understanding of who we are as individuals, where we shop and what time of day we shop, all of those types of things, to be able to say, well, that's a transaction that I expect Lee to make. And then if it's an unusual transaction, then we start to flag that as a change in behavior and potentially a fraudulent transaction that's taking place.
So then your solution is kind of identifying the idiosyncrasies of that individual consumer and then kind of monitoring that behavior to make sure it's consistent?
Yeah, and I often think about it, it's like when we used to shop into a local store, is the person behind the register who we're buying from would start to know us. They'd know our name, they would know our coffee order, all of those types of things. And it's how do we give the fraud solution an understanding of who you are so that we know what the likely transactions are that you're going to make, and sort of build up that almost personal relationship from an understanding when we should accept money and when we shouldn't accept money from either your credit card or your debit card or transferring funds out of your bank account.
And this is really a tricky situation for the service provider, right? Because the consumer is expecting a level of speed in terms of a transaction and getting what they want when they want it. And anytime there is something that slows that down or is a hurdle in front of that, that is, like you mentioned, impacting that customer experience. And so people are expecting an instantaneous kind of transaction nowadays. And that's just really difficult. And I don't think people appreciate how hard it is to do that.
No, exactly. And a lot of these platforms, they're processing like thousands of transactions per second. And then at the same time, we need to take in lots of different data points and analyze those and make a decision about whether or not that transaction should go through. So a lot of the work that we do at Featurespace is how do you really operationalize those algorithms and the machine learning so that it can operate sort of both at scale in terms of volume, but also in terms of speed, so that we are minimizing the impact in terms of when you are waiting for that payment to be accepted, is that's as fast as possible and also as accurate as possible, so that we minimize that situation where it is genuinely you that's making that transaction and the payment isn't accepted. So that's one of our missions, is to continue to make those solutions as accurate as possible to be able to differentiate good from bad.
So now, how are service providers dealing with fraud right now? Is that something that they typically just try to solve on their own internally? Or is it that they are searching for kind of these third-party solutions like yours?
So I guess fraud there's a number of different ways in which it can be perpetrated. So a lot of organizations will have a combination of services and technology that they're using from providers, as well as their own fraud strategy teams and their own expertise, that they sort of pull all of that together to have the fraud defenses that they have within their environment to protect their consumers. So it's generally a combination of all of that. And then as the fraudsters are becoming more and more sophisticated, it's then around sort of pulling together the right technologies to be able to fight with the same machinery that the criminals are using to try to break into and use those technology solutions.
And then the fraudsters are they winning? Who's winning right now?
So I always describe it as a cat and mouse game. So I think often what we start to see is that as fraud grows in a certain area, the technology then improves to be able to solve that. And then the fraudsters move into another area, and then the technology needs to continue to move to be able to get through and identify that. But that's also one of the really important things that we built at Featurespace, is to enable our solution to adapt and evolve with both genuine customer behavior, but also with those fraudulent patterns. And although COVID was an experience that I don't think any of us would want to relive, it was a great test for our technology when we suddenly saw a dramatic shift in March last year, when we all sort of went into different forms of lockdown, and how we spent our money changed, and there was a dramatic shift to a lot of that spending being online. And our solutions were able to adapt to those changes and also the new fraud trends that took place during COVID to make sure that the solutions continue to be as accurate and to be able to stop the fraud that was taking place.
So now when you moved your solution from kind of where it began, I guess, in academia, and then moved it into enterprise level businesses, how did that happen? Did you have partners early on that allowed you to kind of beta test this within their ecosystem? How did you kind of move into the business world?
It's a great question. So there was, I guess, lots of hard work and sleepless nights from everyone within Featurespace to be able to get there. And also, I think a lot of our early customers took a leap of faith in wanting to, I guess, understand the innovation and the technology that we had, and they saw that that there was the potential to really make a difference in terms of being able to stop that criminal activity. And so we owe a lot of that to our early customers that enabled us to continue to develop and mature the technology so that it's now into a lot of those environments where it's mission critical to make sure that the financial systems remain secure and keep running as well. No one wants to be able to try to use their credit card or use their bank and that be unavailable because the systems behind the scenes aren't working.
So now, are you replacing something that they had, or are you just augmenting what they're already doing?
Generally, it's a mixture of both. So usually, we'll be augmenting and adding additional capability into what they have, or it may be then also uplifting it from something that was potentially like a rules-based system, which was just operating on what I had previously described in terms of identifying a known fraud pattern and stopping that, and then replacing that with the machine learning solution, which is able to understand that behavior in a lot more detail.
And then your solution is kind of learning as it goes, so it's evolving.
Exactly. And that was one of the really interesting things that when we started Featurespace was that us as, I guess, individuals have our own behavior, but that behavior also starts to evolve and change over time. And so rather than having a system that remains static, is we built a system that would adapt and evolve with those changes of behavior.
Now, do you have like an ideal customer at this point, or is it pretty much any fintech business?
I guess for us, an ideal customer is anyone that is processing financial transactions that we can then help them to make sure that platform and their products and services are as safe and secure as possible.
So is it primarily banking? Is it healthcare? Is it e-commerce, or all of them?
So it's pretty much all of those. So wherever there's a transfer of money from one person to the other, whether it's a bank which is issuing credit cards, so that could be one. It could be a organization which is helping merchants accept payments either in a retail or physical environment or online, or even if it's like a banking scenario where it's moving money between two bank accounts, or like a peer-to-peer chain, a movement of money, or even something as simple as like writing a check or paying a bill. All of those are solutions where Featurespace is being deployed to be able to identify fraud.
Now, are you getting clients right now coming out of like a crisis where something bad has happened and they're like, okay, we can't have this happen again, so we better call the Featurespace folks? Or is it something that people are being proactive on and saying, look, we have to stay ahead of this, let's call the Featurespace folks?
Generally, people are proactive. I guess not many people, like usually there is a fraud platform in place, but then it's sort of about making sure that those solutions are adaptable, because also the financial industry doesn't remain static. We're sort of seeing very big sort of shifts in terms of how the technology continues to evolve and be deployed. So especially if we look at even from a credit card perspective, is we've now got a lot of the online wallets in things like Apple Pay and Samsung Pay, but also then from a banking perspective, there's a lot of movement to like real-time payments, a lot more sort of person-to-person transfers of funds. So as those different solutions become available, or those different ways of moving money, is the fraud solutions need to be there and protect those transaction types as well.
So now what is on your roadmap? How do you move ahead? I mean, you have built in an evolving platform, so I would imagine that kind of has you always looking to the next thing. So how does Featurespace kind of stay on the bleeding edge of things?
No, definitely. So I guess one of our tagline is to outsmart risk. So we're trying to stay ahead of the criminals that are looking at sort of how they're going to perpetrate their attacks, and making sure that we build technology which is able to, I guess, keep up and sort of stay ahead of what's happening out in the industry. And one of the amazing innovations that we've introduced recently is around applying deep learning in sort of an application that we called automated deep behavioral networks, which provides even greater ability for our technology to learn different behavioral trends and be much more adaptable in terms of how it's able to learn and evolve to generate more accurate solutions and being able to identify those fraud trends and risk. And also for us is also looking at other areas of financial crime. So working within aspects of anti-money laundering and helping organizations identify those types of suspicious transactions that are taking place as well.
Well, congratulations on all the success. If there's a company out there that wants to learn more about Featurespace, what is the website?
So our website is featurespace.com. So nice and simple to be able to find us.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for sharing your story today. You're doing important work and we appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Lee. It was great to be on the show today.
All right. This is Lee Cantor. We will see you all next time on Atlanta Business Radio.
Today's episode of Atlanta Business Radio is brought to you by OnPay. Built in Atlanta, OnPay is the top-rated payroll and HR software anywhere. Get 1 month free at onpay.com.